Welcome to this week's episode of Promising Young Surgeon. This week, Chelsea Turgeon joins us to discuss her epic life, including her decision to leave her residency training, how she arrived at that decision, and what she's done to create her dream life since then. Chelsea Turgeon is a career transformation coach, six-figure CEO, best-selling author, and full-time digital nomad of 4 years. She is a residency training dropout. With a lengthy track record of academic excellence and achievement through medical school, she graduated at the top of her class and matched into her top choice OB-GYN residency. She was in the middle of her second year of OB-GYN residency when she made the decision to quit residency and strike out on her own. Now she travels the world as a digital nomad, entrepreneur, and podcaster. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chelsea.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'd really love to start with talking a little bit about what residency was like for you, what your training experience was like, and what led to ultimately the decision to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, and I don't think I'm alone in this, residency was hard. I think residency is pretty challenging and just difficult for everyone. But it's one of those things that it's a level of hard that you really need your why. You need a reason why you're doing it to keep going. I've had this recently with like hiking. I was hiking this mountain. It was like 13,000 feet up and we left at midnight. We were doing a hike starting at midnight. We were trying to get there for sunrise. And partway through the hike, I was like, I don't want to keep doing this. I wanted to quit. I was so tired. The altitude was starting to get to me. And the only reason I kept going was because we had this intention setting ceremony before we left, where we all came up with our why, and my friends were reminding me of that. And so it's one of those things where unless you have this really solid grounding in why you're doing this, it's hard to keep going. And so for me, in the middle of residency, and I'll just go back to like the things that were hard for me. One, sleep deprivation. I think that's hard for everybody. And I don't know if that's something that I think that's just a hard for me that I've realized now I'm not willing to really compromise on. Other parts that were hard, just like not enough time to see your patients, to get all the notes done, just feeling like I was constantly in a rush, just sort of that time freneticness was really hard. Just the sheer amount of information you had to learn, the life or death decisions, all of those pieces that are like pretty hard for everybody. But then for me, as I'm going through this and as I keep coming back to like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I waking up every day and putting myself through this? I'm just like coming up short over and over again. And I can't connect to why I'm doing this. And so that's when I ended up taking 5 weeks off. I was really doing my soul searching, really connecting to what is the purpose of me doing this here? And why that go ahead.
Well, no, I really love that. And I definitely want to get more into the 5 weeks. So
yeah.
I totally get what you're saying. And I think that I definitely identify with, I think most people recognize the difference between spending a lot of time, blood, guts, and tears on something that they love or feel passionate about or feel truly called to do, as opposed to something that they are doing because it is their job. And I definitely notice anecdotally that some of my co-residents who dreamt of being a head and neck surgeon since the age of 4, which, I mean, that's pretty niche. I don't know who they were talking to that like they got it planted in their head. They're like, okay, I gotta be a head and neck surgeon. Very specific dream. But having, trained under the same conditions that I did and kind of receiving the same, if not worse, abuse, they just took it really very well in stride and as part of the bigger picture, because they were like, again, this has been the dream since 4. So you can do whatever you want to me. And I guess that the reason that this all links up to the bigger picture, though, is that the reality is if we only have surgeons who feel that way, there's just not going to be enough surgeons. And so, like, I obviously feel very strongly that this should be a job and a workplace that will also accommodate like a young, bright person who's hardworking, who cares a lot, but it may not be, their deepest calling. Because otherwise we're losing so many like potential phenomenal physicians and surgeons.
That's such a good point that like you can see how for some people they can withstand all of the, I'm going to say the nonsense that comes along with training because it is so deeply their calling. But then it doesn't need to be such an intense screening process that those are the only people who survive it.
Right. We just already are in a doctor shortage. So, I think that that's too limiting. But
Yeah.
in terms of those 5 weeks that you took off, what was that conversation like where you ended up at that decision with your PD jointly? And then, yes, how did you spend that time in a smart way that was very constructive for you?
Yeah. So I'll just go a little bit back before I even get to the 5 weeks because there was just a lot of things leading up to it as well. So I had my first inkling that I really did not want to continue this in residency was during November of my intern year. And I remember meeting with my chief resident at that point, telling her, like, I really don't want to continue this. I don't think this is right for me. And as you probably know, in medicine, it's a lot harder to quit than it is to get started in the first place. If people really don't want you to leave, which is fine. Like, you don't want to you don't want to just leave at the first moment you feel like you want to, because you do want to be sure about it. I get that. And so, like, during this conversation with my chief resident, we really came to the conclusion that I'm going to, give it my best shot, stay in it for a bit longer, and then reevaluate. And so I was doing that through all of intern year. And I got to the end of intern year and I was doing a lot better, just skills wise, confidence wise, getting better feedback from my attendings, and just at a place where I felt like I was like, okay, I got the hang of this. And I still didn't want to do it. I had my first rotation of second year it's like in the community. It was like it's outpatient. So we got to do these electives second year, and mine happened to be the very first rotation. And during that time, it's like you get to start exploring what you think you might want to do after residency. And for me, I was very disillusioned with the idea of fellowship or continuing in the academic world. And so I was like, the only thing I could see myself doing is sort of like community-based outpatient. I'm not all outpatient because people are laboring, but just sort of a community-based type practice. And so I go out into the community and I'm practicing with people. And for some reason, it was even worse. Like it was even worse to me than academia. I think a lot of the people that I was working with, it just felt like nobody had fulfillment or satisfaction. It's like you could tell people chose that route because they were disillusioned with academia, but it was sort of, I don't know, it was just like this consolation prize that people were not jazzed up about anything. It was just a very dead inside kind of a place. And I went to multiple places and locations. And so I just got to this point where I was like, okay, I would not be doing this. And I've already eliminated everything else. And so I hit this point at the very beginning of second year where I was like, I do not see myself being fulfilled in any of these scenarios after residency. And so then comes the question, like, then why would I keep going in residency?
Right.
So I met again with my program director. This time it was chief resident and program director to say, like, I really don't think I want to continue, but I had these two really difficult rotations coming up. It was OB nights and GYN onc. And for some reason I was talked into like, just get through those and then see how you feel, which looking back, it's like, that doesn't really make sense. Why would doing harder things make me want to do it more? But anyway, so I was going through those rotations, and by the end of GYN onc, it was like I think it was like 8 or 9 weeks of those two back to back. By the end of GYN onc, I was just like a complete zombie, dead inside. My program director messaged me like the very last day of GYN onc and was like, we need to meet. And during that meeting, I think people had probably noticed I wasn't feeling well or doing well. And she was telling me, like, people are starting to notice. So what do you want to do? Like, I don't want you to shoot yourself in the foot. If you do decide you want to continue, I want you to continue with like full enthusiasm. And so what do you feel like you need? Do you want to take this next rotation off? And to me, that felt like the biggest gift. So when she initially said that to me, I felt this huge relief, this huge sense of like, oh my God, I can just take 5 weeks off. And I agreed, like, very excitedly. But then literally the moment after I agreed, then I just felt this deep like shame and failure and this sense of like, I shouldn't need this. I shouldn't need to take 5 weeks off. I should be able to just keep going. So it was this really interesting experience of like, this is what I wanted, but I shouldn't. Yeah.
And I think that is so tough for all of us because it's almost like an identity death. Like, you were a machine. You were a high achieving, very academic minded, academically excelling person. And so I totally agree with you. And I think that it makes a lot of people afraid to even consider something else because this is so tied up in their identity. Like most people, that would be a whole other trigger for an existential crisis to have an identity death like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I still like it wasn't enough shame or whatever for me to like not want to take the leave. Like I knew I needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I still like agreed, but it was just this interesting feeling of like, oh, I feel like a failure. And I remember I had not like I had a box of my stuff. I don't know what I was bringing, but I just remember like going home that day knowing like I'm not coming back for 5 more weeks. And I was like carrying some of my stuff with me that I wanted to not leave at the hospital. And I'm like going it down in the elevator and being like, I'm a failure. Like I failed. And it was just like a really hard first couple days because that was my initial like pain point that I had to work through before I was able to just start coming back to like myself and what I really wanted.
And I think that it's scary because you are a person who is like pretty in tune with themselves. You know, you'd been in tune with yourself prior to training, things like that, having done like a lot of the self work. And so you even felt some of that shame, even with your logical mind, you know, saying, oh, there's nothing to be ashamed of. If this were my friend, I'd be like reassuring them, you know, you're all good from the outside looking in. But I guess what would you say to the regular trainee who does have an experience that brings them to that point, that first pain point of like the shame or I gave up, or not just I gave up, but like most trainees will feel this even if they like ask for one mental health day or something like that. If they're like, I'm at a breaking point, like I've been in the hospital for 40 hours. So like, can I please step out or go home or whatever the request may be? I think that puts them there as well.
Yeah. Our brain is not that reliable in general, especially in situations like this. And especially in relation to ourselves. Like our brain is not, unless you've done a lot of self work and self compassion work and all of that, it's like our brain is, we tend to be much harsher to ourselves than to anyone else. And then like harsher towards ourselves than other people are to us. And so I would say like, just don't trust your brain initially and see if you can find somebody who is really compassionate and who will give you that sense of unconditional love and compassion. Ideally, someone not in the medical field, unless you know for sure that the person in the medical field is full of self-compassion or like full of compassion. But I think just finding somebody who you can share those feelings with, maybe a therapist if you have one, or maybe just like a friend or family member that you love like outside of medicine, and just letting them know how you're feeling and what you're going through, and just asking them like, can you just say something really nice to me or compassionate, because it's like hard to practice it on ourselves initially. And I think it helps to come from someone else.
Yes. That's so funny because it reminds me of this old quote, I think from like Whitney Cummings. And the quote is like, your reptilian brain is trying to kill you. You know, like none of us were evolved for this. We definitely were not evolved for residency training. Like, sorry, no offense. We were not made to be residents. And so of course, a lot of those, you know, negative loops and chemical experiences that we have when we're like constantly sleep deprived, maybe emotionally activated because of the events at work, things like that. Sure, it gets you so dysregulated. So after the first pain point, after those first couple days into the 5 weeks, then what did the remainder of the time look like?
Yeah. So I'm still really proud of myself for the way I approached that time. When I look back at it, it's like, how did I know how to do all of that? I'm not sure, but I feel like I approached it in the exact correct way for what I needed. And so what I did was I just wrote out in my journal like exactly what my intentions were for those 5 weeks. So initially I was feeling overwhelmed because I was like, I have to figure out my whole life. And that's really scary, right? So what an overwhelming idea to figure out your whole life in 5 weeks. I decided like through my journaling to narrow it down to a binary question. Like, do I want to be a doctor? Yes or no? Wasn't even, do I want to keep going with OB-GYN? Do I want to keep going in this particular program? Because I think where we start to we get muddled and confused and overwhelmed. I've worked through this with clients too, is when they're trying to answer 100 different questions at once. And because you don't have clarity on one, you can't answer the other. And this is contingent on that. And so I was just like, no contingencies, no if this, then that. Just, do I want to be a doctor? Yes or no?
And what I really liked about your story, just of course sharing a little bit of background context, but when we really go granularly and talk about even your medical school experience, and then the decision to go to medical school, like you have talked about, as part of your story, just how even the decision to go to medical school was in part because you were academically excellent. And of course, like people are always impressed when they meet a promising young woman and she's like, I'm going to go to medical school, I'm going to become a doctor. People are hype. Like they love that. And so it does make it harder for one to even know what they truly want, as opposed to what maybe family friends say, like peer pressure, societal pressure to succeed.
Yeah, exactly. And so I had been listening to external voices for so long around the topic of career without totally realizing that's what I was doing. But what I wanted to do is just dial it down to, like, how do I want to contribute to the world? And is being a doctor the best way for me to do that? And it is a binary question, but it's still a huge question, right? So I don't want to downplay the fact that that's still difficult and that's hard to answer. And the thing is, I don't think I really answered it through my brain. I did not answer it through a pro con list. I answered it by going on walks in nature and by journaling and by connecting to myself through meditation and yoga and by not having conversations with anyone else in my life about the big elephant in the room of like, what am I going to do? So it's not that I isolated myself entirely, but I just put up a boundary at that point that I was not going to ask for anyone else's advice or opinion or feedback on what I was going to do. And it was really going to come from within. And it took a while, right? It took like the first 2 weeks I was just sleeping a lot and I didn't feel like I had a lot of clarity. The week 3, I went on a hiking trip to Utah, and that's when I started to feel a little bit more clear. And then week 4 was when it really hit me that I didn't want to go back. Part of that was I was able to drill down to like, how do I want to contribute to the world? And what I was writing at that point was like, I want to help people live healthier and happier lives. And then like I was kind of having a conversation with myself in the journal. And so I was like, well, is medicine the only way to do that? And I was like, it can't be. And then I was like, well, do I feel like I'm living a healthier, happier life in medicine? And I was like, no, I don't. And so it's like this series of kind of self-questioning really brought me to this place of like, this actually doesn't feel like an aligned career path for me.
If you could go back, would you go to medical school again?
I think the easy answer is no, because I see that medicine, like being a doctor, was never going to be right for me. But I do actually love my journey. Like I love that I did it only to, and the other reason I think it's good that I did is because I'm very stubborn and like I wouldn't be told otherwise.
Yes, I know. Oh my gosh. Well, obviously, I think we're cut from the same cloth because in my 20s, you could not tell me anything. Honestly, before my 20s, you could not tell me anything. I'm in my early 30s now, and I might listen, like I might. I'm definitely like, yeah. It's either, okay, I'm going to listen a little bit or I'm going to die. So now you can tell me some stuff, but it's so funny because that's even the same thing that I was told in my early 20s. If you can be anything else, if you can picture yourself doing anything else or having a great skill set suited for anything else, don't become a surgeon. And of course, I was like, psh. It wasn't that I couldn't see myself doing anything else. It was just literally that I saw that as like a direct challenge.
Yeah, I love that. I feel the other part of that is like, yes, it was a direct challenge, and I'm like, watch me, like I'm that kind of person. So I get that. But the other thing that I think was really good about the fact that I went to med school is I almost needed to get to this point where I achieved everything I thought I could have wanted, checked all the boxes of what could impress people, the prestige. I needed to do it all to see that like that wasn't the answer. And if I hadn't done it all and done it quickly and sort of peaked at like 27, like in the eyes of society, then I think I would still be chasing the wrong type of validation. Like, I am glad that I did it and I checked those boxes and had that experience of like, okay, so this is not the answer because I feel really empty. And now I need to figure out what will fulfill me on the inside.
And not only that, but I think that what's been so cool, like with your business and with the work that you do, I mean, of course, I understand that you work with a ton of healthcare professionals. And so, yes, your experience as a physician going through the medical training system and becoming a physician, like that is integral because how could you best serve like that type of a population without your own experience? So I definitely love that. And I love how it feels like by the end of one's 20s, it is possible to kind of look back. That's the first time that I ever looked back and loved the journey or like had anything nice to say about the journey. But it took that much time and like the wisdom that comes with age to get to the back end of your 20s, which I understand that you're at as well. And I want to talk about travel a little bit and, you know, the big 3-0. So you knew by week 4 to 5 then. And so how did that go when you went back to meet with your program director?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, we were texting like throughout the thing. She would basically text me once a week and be like, so how's it going? And then finally on like week 4, we were doing a phone call. And the funny thing is, I never even said it specifically. But she really inferred and it was really nice. So I told her, like, I'm not excited about the idea of coming back. And she just sort of took that right away and was like, okay, she's not coming back. She's turning in her resignation. So then she kind of got the ball rolling for me to start doing that, which was nice because it's a hard thing to say out loud.
Yeah, that is really classy that she didn't make you say it.
Yeah. But then, I mean, I did have to say it to like all my friends and family members and all of that. But with my program director, I just, we were already in conversation. So end of week 4, she kind of knew that I wasn't going to be coming back. I went in and like had to sign some papers and turn stuff in. And then they created this plan for me that I was sort of like negotiating. I was like, okay, well, I don't need to leave right now, but I want to be leaving in the next 3 months. And I still didn't have things totally planned out what I was going to do. But I was like, if I have about 3 months, I'm going to figure it out. And I was like, but it'd be nice to have a paycheck for those 3 months. So I sort of negotiated like, these are the things I'd be willing to do. These are the things I'd rather not do. And so they basically got me covering clinic for all the other residents, while the other residents were kind of covering me in the hospital setting. And so I was kind of doing that. And then I did have to do a full antepartum rotation for about 6 weeks as well, the very end of my time. And I did covered normal call during the holidays because it was like December time when I was doing all of this. So we kind of created that. I had 3 months to really get all my other stuff together. And I still had to show up every day at the hospital with my co-residents who were not thrilled with me. And that was a difficult time because I felt really alone. But I also started to feel excited because I was making all my other plans on the side of what was next.
Yeah, like the light at the end of the tunnel was there. But I'm sorry, because I can only imagine, of course, being a resident is really tough. So I can imagine what co-residents would respond like to just know that their schedule is maybe about to become more tenuous. And not only that, but like maybe see somebody live out their dreams and escape the hospital. That's like the ultimate fantasy. Like that would be hard to watch somebody escape when you are in the dredges of it. But I still hope that people, were generally kind and understanding about it. But I'm not obviously going to hold my breath for stuff like that because you have the right mindset by just being like, I had my plan in motion. I stayed professional. I fulfilled my professional duties.
Yeah.
No worries either way.
Yeah. Like I definitely I do not talk to any of my co-residents anymore, like at all. Like it was like I don't want to pretend like everything's sunshine and rainbows when you quit. Like there's decisions and sacrifices and things that you have to decide to be okay with. And probably half of them were like actually angry with me. And then the other half was like neutral and they kind of understood, but they still didn't really want to hang out with me outside of, going to work. And as you probably know, like in residency, your co-residents are like your best friends. And so I really did like lose my social circle for about 3 months. And it's just a part of it. I think even in the moment when it sucked and felt awful, I knew like it's okay. Like I'm going to find other friends at some point in life. Like I'm not going to be a friendless loser forever. And so it's just one of those things that you have to be okay with some people not being thrilled with you when you're following your own path.
Yeah. And, to represent both sides of the spectrum, though, that's still pretty good that you were friends with them beforehand. Because I will say, yes, I definitely do still keep in touch with a couple residents. Definitely there's a handful of just solely female surgeons, I guess, but I keep in touch with them, and a couple are very close friends. So I agree to that extent, but I will say that in my personal training experience, it's much more the type of thing where I just think, oh, like mostly they terrorized me. Like we had a run of senior residents who were really huge bullies, like just absolutely drunk with power, lording it over the junior residents, just really very, very horrible to work with. And so, of course, you could have an experience like mine, or you could have an experience like yours, where at least, I mean, there was some basis of friendship, but I understand what you mean, because you pay for it one way or the other. I'm very, you picked freedom, and you know how much I respect you and the decisions that you made. One thing that I think of when you were talking about your journey, especially med school, reaching the top of the mountain, getting your top choice residency program, it's that whole like conditional happiness, the destination fallacy, when I XYZ, I'll be happy. And it's so easy because you get on the conveyor belt, most people do in their teens, if not at age 4, like, some of my colleagues. But in your teens, you get on and then you're like, okay, if I get into a great medical school, I'll be happy. But that lasts for 1 minute. Then you get into medical school and you need to start worrying about matching into residency. And then you're like, if I just graduate residency, attending life will be great. But of course, this is called a fallacy for a reason, and it really is very oppositional to contentment and like peace in one's daily life. And so it is troubling to think of how many doctors do give up like a decade of peace and contentment. Sure, there might be the rare, very zen person who's able to like marry the two, and they can be in this grinder, the meat grinder, and also have contentment and like really love the journey the whole time. But I have not met that person yet. And so we just put off and put off.
Yeah, it's so hard. It's that idea. And I think it's not just doctors who do it. It's like literally all of society. And so it doesn't feel like it's incorrect. It feels like we're pursuing life correctly, that we just need all these circumstances to happen and then we'll feel better. And people do it with their own appearance. Like if I lose weight, then I'll be happy. If I have a partner, then I'll be happy. And we just do it so pervasively that it's really hard to recognize or notice, especially probably most of our parents have grown up like that. And just everywhere you look, there's examples of like in a capitalistic society in general, it's like, if you have this next thing or achieve this next thing, you'll be happy. But then I think what makes it really dangerous in medicine is the things are so far away and so long that like, then it's harder to find out soon enough that it's not really going to work out the way you think, like, because our training takes such a large portion of our lives that it's easy to keep that mindset for like 10, 12, 15 years, basically. Whereas other people, maybe they get their reality check sooner.
Yeah, totally. Doctors are just the masters of delayed gratification, for sure. I mean, and especially the people who stay in academics and things like that. But, it rings true how even in your residency experience, really like a year before you left, you were like, hey guys, what's up? I'm having some thoughts. I'm having some dark thoughts. Like, what's up? And they were like, give it a year. And I mean, I myself have been told things like that. Okay, well, it'll be different at the next stage of training. And it has not been different yet,
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to can I say something about that quickly too? Of like, I understand where people are coming from when they're trying to give you that advice. But what I think for me now, like if I were to work with younger students or mentor them, like I think the biggest thing that's missing is reflecting, like deferring everyone back to their own experience to make their decisions. And I think that's the biggest problem is not nobody, but for the most part, people are not like really checking in with like, what is it that you're feeling? Like, you be the judge of your own experience. What is it for you that's making it difficult? They're kind of brushing it off with these blanket statements around like, it'll be better at this point, it'll be better at that point, without really allowing each person to be their own individual like decider of their experience. And I feel like that's where it gets to be the most dangerous, because maybe it is true. Like for me, it really was true. I needed to wait a year to really feel confident and comfortable in my decision. That was true. But for some people, it's not. Some people really know right away. And so I think that's just what's missing, is the honoring of your own experience in making these decisions.
Of course, a lot of residents feel trapped. Even if there are like little alarm bells going off, we become excellent at ignoring those sensations, thoughts, what have you. But, one of the most commonly cited reasons, I guess there's really two commonly cited reasons that I can think of why a resident would be like, I cannot leave. Number one reason would just be like straight up embarrassment, the shame component. Like they just will not admit, even though like nobody's thinking about you, this is your own life and life is too short. But, of course, all these different thought distortions we have. And so the shame component, but then number two, of course, the financial component, because I even trained with residents who would be like, wow, this is like some bullshit, but I am $200,000 in debt, and so I cannot leave. And they just kind of mutter about that and go about their day miserably. But what advice would you have for people who maybe are hearing those little warning bells, and ways to think about those two common roadblocks differently?
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so let's do the shame component first, because it's so real and so true. Like that was for me a big thing for a while, is like, what would people think about me? Because for so long I've been pursuing this path kind of for other people's feedback and for other people to be impressed. I wouldn't have really admitted that to myself at the time, but that was a huge driver. Is I really lived for that, like the atta girl, or the like, oh, people are impressed with me when I say that I'm a doctor. And it really did bolster my ego in a very temporary way, but that was real. So what happens if that's what you're struggling with? Our world in the medical field is really narrow and small. So a lot of times the only people you're following on Instagram are in medicine. The only people you hang out with outside of work are in medicine. Like it's not true for everyone, but I think a lot of us have very narrow social circles and very narrow worlds. And so if you're in a social circle where like the only thing you know is this one level of success, this one type of success, of course it's going to feel like if you're not following that path that you won't be successful. So I would say like broaden your horizons, like open up your world, see if you can even just start following people on Instagram who have nothing to do with medicine. I think that really helps. I had one of my clients, so I was like, you literally have to unfollow everyone in the medical field on your Instagram for like at least during match week, but like really all the time. So just starting, because for everything that induces like shame in one social circle or one culture, there's other cultures where like people are proud of that one thing, right? So it's all just this relative association. And like, I can see that now as I travel, as I interact with people in different countries and in different professions, like everyone values different things, but you're just in a society right now that really values not sleeping, prestige, powering through. And so like, but what could happen if you were in a society that valued something different? And the cool thing is that we live in a world where we have access to the internet, where you can tap into all these different micro communities and places that value other things. So can you start trying to find those types of communities? Maybe it's like a sports thing that you're pursuing on the side, or like a church group or religious something. Like, can you just start to find other communities that have different value systems, so that you don't feel like your whole world is this one area that only values this one thing?
Yes, and that I love that so much, because that even happened to me when I went and did my ENT residency training at a program that was not prestigious. I had insecurities. I remember asking my then boyfriend, now husband, about it, and I was like, people are going to judge me. They're going to look at me, differently, and this and that. And he was like, and here's the great thing about the fact that he is not in medicine. He does bring that perspective like very much into my life, into our home, of a person who has a lot more appreciation for things that are not just in the narrow, very narrow, academically defined regions of success. He was like, what are you talking about? He's like, you're a doctor and you're an ENT. And I was like, oh, but like, is your family gonna think worse of me? And like, maybe your friends will judge me. He was like, come on, like, grow up. My friends are amazed that you're a doctor. They have no idea what ENT is. Already, like, being a surgeon, being a doctor of any kind is like a great feat. And the point is that in the real world, people don't even differentiate. He was like, okay, how many people do you think could look down on you? I was like, anybody. I was like, maybe neurosurgeons, maybe the whole rest of the ENTs. I was like, cardiothoracics, they could absolutely, like, they could roast me. They'd be like, well, she's here in the food chain of the hospital. And again, he's like, what is that? Like a couple hundred people? Like, truly, we need to open our eye. And that's the thing is, I even was there many years ago. That's like 7 years ago now. But I love all of your concrete advice. And I definitely would just echo to people, yes, like, that made my life immediately better to get some much needed non-medical outside human perspective. And then not only that, but, it just allowed me to almost break the fourth wall and see beyond academics and academic achievement, right? Like, I am absolutely not trying to really impress, like, those couple hundred ENTs who could look down on me. I'm like, what's up, guys? I'm chilling, and I really have enjoyed feeling free of that pressure.
Yeah. And it's like, if you're trying to operate your life based on a ranking system and based on just excelling in any ranking system, there's always going to be a way that you're on the bottom. And there's always going to be there's always going to be a way for you to not be enough or not feel enough. And so it's like, that was a huge thing that I started doing is I was listening to these podcasts. They're kind of like spiritual type personal growth podcasts. And it was about like the ranking and how we live our lives in such a ranking system. And like, just how can we stop doing that? Like, how can we just stop seeing everything as better than or less than? Even in dating, we'll talk about, like, to make our friend feel better with a guy, oh, you were way too good for him. So we're ranking instead of just saying, like, you guys were not a fit. You were not a match. Right. And so we just do this in so many areas of our life where there's better than and less than and, cooler than and lame. And like, can we just like not do that? Can we notice when we're doing that and just be like, I wonder like what it would feel like to just be who we are and to not feel like we have to always measure up to each other.
That reminds me of The Courage to be Disliked, because I loved their approach to all relationships. Just the thought that relationships and how you approach them as a person, either you believe that relationships are vertical, hierarchical, like what you're talking about, or they are horizontal, where, we exist, on this horizontal plane. And yes, we can maybe be fit or not. That's a whole other thing. But what I really loved about it, because I started to think, I bet I know a lot of people who would argue that work should be vertical. Work should be hierarchical. Hierarchy's king, like, love that at work. But then they would say something like, maybe outside of work, sure, horizontal relationships. But the book argues that there is no such thing as a mix of the two. You are either a person who truly believes that they're vertical across the board, or you believe that they're horizontal across the board. And I loved that. And I believe horizontal across the board, which is why I don't love the extreme hierarchy and vertical approach that people take to medicine.
I love that. I think that's so true, because it's like hard to turn on or off. It's like, oh, I feel horizontal in this setting, but vertical. And it's like, I think that's I'm interested to read that, because I think the vertical is the ranking system and nobody really wins in that, because you're always just trying to win, trying to get to the highest. But yeah, horizontal, that feels like the way to go.
Yeah, and I will make a plug for, on Rethinking Residency, Dr. Lathan does this hidden curriculum whole segment, and I loved her recent piece is about specialty disrespect. And I love it. Like, she's med peds, she's faculty, she works with residents, like a really brilliant person who writes on all these topics. But like, I love that, and I agree, right? Like, why are people negging on EM, things like that. Of course, the more specialty disrespect is allowed and like encouraged with the next trainees, the sicker that the culture of medicine becomes. And so I really loved her piece, and it's about maybe a more vertical approach to those.
Yeah.
And so for part 2 of it, we talked about shame, but part 2 is like the financial golden handcuffs. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, I love that. So I just did a podcast yesterday. I'm doing a series of like hot take Tuesdays where I'm just like saying what I think unfiltered on my podcast, just like a short little episode. And so I did my one yesterday about like how I left with $120,000 worth of student loans, because that might seem a little crazy to some people. So when I was first unhappy, back in that first part of intern year when I felt unhappy and like, this isn't what I want to do, leaving did not feel like an actual option because of the money, because of my loans. It almost was like, oh, that's a cute idea. That would be nice to just, leave and like pursue your dreams and do what you want. But like, let's be realistic, because you have $120,000 worth of student loans, which is not even, that's probably like middle of the road for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then some people have undergrad loans too that kind of add on top of that. So I understand. And I've been in that place where it's like, it doesn't feel like a real option because you have this set of student loans. But then when things started to shift for me was during that 5-week leave of absence, I was on a call, like a free call with a physician burnout coach. And she did the whole coaching thing where she's like, if I could wave a magic wand and you could have anything you wanted, what would you want your life to look like? And it's kind of a silly question, but I was very clear. It was so interesting. I was like, well, I would, have a morning where I wake up and I have time to journal and like do self-care. And then I'd go to a cafe and be like working on my laptop. And I wasn't sure what I was working on yet, but it was like, yeah, I'm like working on something I care about. I'm on my laptop. And so I described this whole day to her. And as I'm describing it, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. This feels so good. And she's like, well, what's keeping you from getting that? And I was like, the money.
Right.
And she was like, okay, anything else? And I'm like looking, like really looking in my brain, like really trying to be like, okay, is there anything else keeping me from getting this? And I was like, no, it's just money. And it was something so weird about like saying it and acknowledging like the literal only barrier between me and living this life that felt so juicy, that felt so aligned, was money. I was like, well, that can't be right. Like, I'm not okay with that. Like, obviously it's a real thing. It's a real, like, we live in a capitalistic world where like we all need money to survive. I'm not going to pretend like it's not a real problem. But I was like, if that's the only problem, I can figure that out. And so I started just looking into like student loan repayment stuff, because I think for some reason in my head, I was like, oh, I can only, like I was doing income-based repayments in residency. And so I was like, okay, I think I had some idea that there was a cap on how long you could do those, or you could only do those if you were in training to be a doctor. I don't know. Like I had some weird ideas about what was going on with all of that, that like the moment I left residency, they would take away the income-based repayment and like my payments would skyrocket and then my salary was nothing. And so I just like looked into it and I was like, oh, it turns out I can just keep doing this. I can just keep doing income-based repayments for a while.
Know that? Wow.
Yeah. You can.
Yeah, that's good to know. But exactly. But part of it too is like, it is scary to look into it. We put up all these mental blocks for ourselves. Like, if more people maybe did poke around and like look at some of these cold hard facts, then more people would seriously consider.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of vague language in there too that you can't always find out. And like even if you get on the phone with some of the loan financiers, they kind of give you the runaround. And so there's things where like I think they kind of intentionally make it a black box so that we don't really understand what's going on. So what I know for sure from my own experience is that you can continue doing income-based repayments indefinitely. I am still on income-based repayments. But so once I figured that out, that gave me a little more breathing room, right? Because I was like, all right, I can have some time to figure out what I want to do. I also had in my head, like, initially that being a doctor is like the only thing I knew of to make a 6-figure salary in a short period of time. So like when I left residency, I was about 2.5 years away from being an attending, having a 6-figure salary. So then in my head, initially I was like, well, whatever I change to, if I change to something, it needs to get me to a 6-figure salary in that time period. Like I got 2.5 years to get there because otherwise my interest is going to keep building and then everything's going to snowball out of control. And I felt this like huge time pressure that like, even when I was like thinking maybe I could change, I was like, whatever I do, it got to be successful immediately. And then that starts to limit your options because that like, what makes that? How do you know? How can you guarantee that that's going to happen? And so there was just a lot of other things that were starting to cause anxiety around that point. And then I just made this decision that I am going to pay my loans off $1 at a time. And I'm not going to rush it. And even if the interest gets so big that it like causes an avalanche on top of me, like that's just what it's going to be. And I just stopped caring. It was just this weird switch of like, I don't like this number in someone's kind of bank balance somewhere that I owe this money is real, right? That's a real thing. But what felt more real was my time and my energy and the things I was doing every day. And I was like, I'm not going to spend my time and my energy in a way that I don't want to in order to make things work for this number in someone else's bank thing somewhere. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do the things I want to do. I'm going to not be illegal. I'm going to pay my loans off in this income-based way and like file my income every year, but I'm just not going to worry about it. And then what I realized, and I think I'll qualify for this, I'm not sure, so TBD, but if you just do that, if you do income-driven repayments for 20 years, it just cleared.
Whoa. I have read that before. Is that for everybody?
Right. I really can't say because I don't like fine print and I'm not good at like reading the details. So like, don't take this as like, I'll tell you in, let's see.
Yeah, like financial advice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Don't take it.
This is not a finance podcast.
Yeah. But when I read it, when I look through it, it looks like it is true. So it's for if you have a certain types of loans, so it has to be federal government. If they're not refinanced, like there's certain things that it has to meet, which I do meet. And if you're making, you can't miss a payment. So if you're making these payments every year for 20 years, that is a sign. Like then they should be cleared. But again, I will let people know when that happens, if that happens. But even if that wasn't the case, I just like let go of the need to like because I think like something that keeps us freaking out about it is like we have to rush to pay it off before the interest starts getting out of control. And I get that, but I don't know, like it's just not a way to live. Like if you would have to do things that are making you significantly unhappy in order to meet those payment requirements, I don't think it's worth it. I think that's a cost benefit analysis you would have to do for yourself. And I do recommend everyone doing that for themselves. Like, what is it actually costing me in soul, in spirit, in like happiness and joy,
physical health and physical health. I will say, of course, like that's a very real, there's even like literal physical tolls.
Yeah.
I would say, of course, I do think that you are in a favorable position since you support yourself. And myself as well. Like I identify with that in that I don't have dependents other than my cute dog and cat. And they kind of keep their costs like very stable. They don't do too much.
You don't have to save for their college fund or anything. So
right. Exactly. And so, but I think that the more that we kick around ideas or, open the door to have these conversations and at least be armed with this information, like that's a good thing. So I really appreciate you, sharing candidly about it.
Yeah, I'm always going to be candid about that. I was like, literally yesterday, as I was recording the podcast, I was like, I really want to log into my Nelnet loan servicer and just like read out what I see at this exact moment. But then I like had to keep figuring out my password and my email. So I was like, I'm not going to do it. But I feel like also being an adult is just always forgetting your password and having to constantly re-verify your identity. And it's so annoying. But anyways,
like that alone.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that alone will derail. I'll be like, oh yeah, I really needed something. And then I'm like, I can't get in there. All right. It's
It's not
tabled.
worth it.
It's tabled. Life's too short. But well, I love chatting with you. The last thing that I wanted to tackle is actually your 33rd birthday is coming up. Am I correct on that?
Yeah,
But I
in
did just
October.
take like 3 years off your life earlier, so I apologize. I was like, but the big 3-3 is coming up later this year, and you're doing a 15-day trip to the Himalayas.
Yes, I am.
Oh my gosh, which is like such a dream. And I know that like you've just mentioned broadly um, in the past that of course like travel is one of your passions, seeing the world. And of course, residents and honestly, even physicians, like even beyond residency, we have a lot of handcuffs around our time. How do you feel getting to do like a dream bucket list trip for your big birthday coming up?
Yeah. So what I love about it is, to me, there's just a lot of symbolism around it. I think I told this story as I was sharing about it, that there was this time in residency where I wanted to do a yoga teacher training and was trying to get my schedule. You like submit it like for the whole year, basically, like where you want your vacation blocks and all of that. And so I knew there was this yoga teacher training in like April of that year, even though I'm submitting my stuff in like July the year before. And I was like, okay, I want to have a vacation block during this block so that I can request to go to that training. And it's like I didn't get the vacation block. And so I couldn't go. So I already knew that early that like there was something I wanted to do like 7 months from now that I couldn't do. And it's so much more than just like in the grand scheme of things, not doing a week-long yoga teacher training. It's not a huge deal. But what I think it represented to me was like, I'm just not in control of my time. And even if they gave me a yes and I got that vacation block, that's kind of a bare minimum for me of like, oh, you can get something that you want if you know 7 months in advance. Because I'm a very last minute person. So I really don't tend to plan that far in advance anyways. And so yeah, just this idea that like my life is so locked in and my schedule is so inflexible that just started to feel really constraining and limiting and heavy. And not that that was like the last straw, but it's just one of those things that it adds up. And so now being able to book this trip. So I had a friend from home. She came to visit me here in Argentina and we did hiking and we were having such a good time. And we were just like kind of casually kicking around the idea of Everest Base Camp. And we've been talking about that for a bit, trekking in Nepal.
Wow.
And then she got back from from the trip to Argentina and she's like, let's just book it. Should we book it? And it's like, I didn't have to check with anyone. I didn't have to do anything. I was like, yeah, let's do it. I could just book this trip where it's like 2 weeks off the grid. And yeah, I'll have to set up my business in a way that there's no calls during that time. There's like things I have to do. It's not like I have no responsibilities, but it's like I can do things like that. And that feels really cool. That feels really freeing. It just feels really expansive. Being able to say yes to the things that I want to do and be the one in charge of like following through with that.
I love that. No, I love that for you. And I hope you have the best trip. I'll definitely be following along. Anyone else whose dream trip, whose interest is piqued by this, definitely check out all of Chelsea's stuff because her pictures on Instagram are like incredible.
Yeah. Thanks.
I want to finish, as I always do, with asking the question, do you believe in karma? And why or why not?
I love that question. Yeah, I do. I believe in karma. I think my version of it is just like when you put out good into the world, good returns to you. I have a harder time with the opposite, like when you put out bad in the world, bad returns to you, because that feels punishing. But I do think that probably is true as well. And I think I like to think that when I'm mad at somebody else, like I don't need to seek revenge on them because I'm like, karma will get them. Like I don't have to do it.
Yes. It can be like a form of alternate rebellion, definitely from that standpoint, just like a responsibility transfer. Like, okay, the universe will get you. I can't waste any of my time and resources like worrying about this and things like that. If you behave badly, you got to think, or I agree. I like to just think, okay, responsibility transfer, the universe and karma will get you. I'm going to focus on my own stuff.
Yeah. I'll go back to me now. And here we go. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. But well, wonderful. It is so great to chat with you. Thank you for coming on again today and chatting. I mean, I feel like we could kind of talk all day about this stuff.
100%. All. Yes, 100%.
Next week, I will be doing another episode of The New Grand Rounds with Frances May Harden. Follow me on Instagram at francismay.md and at Rethinking Residency. Visit my website, rethinkingresidency.com, to learn more about resident physician stories and ways that residents can most effectively navigate the game of residency. I cannot wait to connect with you on the next episode of Promising Young Surgeon.